Coming up on Tech News Weekly, it's me, Jason Howell, and I speak with Joseph Menn from the Washington Post about the CDC. No, not the Center for Disease Control. We're talking about the cult of the dead cow and their encryption scheme from next week's DEF CON.
And I'm Mikah Sargent, and I speak to CNET's Stephen Shankland about his incredibly in-depth, and yes, pun intended, piece about these subsea cables that are the backbone of the internet.
That's a fascinating interview. You have to check it out. Also, the IRS getting more digital than before, and Mikah is not convinced.
I'm not convinced. I get a little salty, but we round things out with a cool story about IBM and NASA teaming up to build what amounts to like NASA GPT for Earth sciences. Plus, we talk about how we would like to see more of AI being used in these kinds of fields, these hard sciences. It's all that coming up on Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 297, recorded Thursday, August 3rd, 2023. cDc's encryption solution.
This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by the AWS Insiders Podcast. Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player or visit cloudfix.oria.com/podcast. We'll also include a link in the show notes. Our thanks to AWS Insiders for their support.
And by Collide. Collide is a device trust solution for companies with Okta, and they ensure that if a device isn't trusted and secure, it can't log into your cloud apps. Visit collide.com/TNW to book an on-demand demo today.
And by Bitwarden, get the open source password manager that can help you stay safe online. Get started with a free Teams or Enterprise plan trial, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am one of your hosts, Mikah Sargent.
And I'm the other guy, Jason Howell, calling from my house. You might hear a little squeaking in the background. That's because I got a brand new puppy a couple of days ago. And this is the only day that I couldn't figure out, like, for my wife to be home. She's out of town. So we're just going to have to deal with it. I don't know.
I hate to make the pun, but I don't hate to make the pun. The last name is particularly appropriate this morning. Howling.
That's right. Exactly. Oh, well, hopefully Bronson will keep himself entertained for the next hour. I'll check in on him here a little bit. But first, let's get to our first interview, the cult of the dead cow. I have very profound memories of Cult of the Dead Cow from the 1980s when I was using the Commodore 64, connecting to bulletin boards, and I would see these cDc docs rolling around. They were a hacking group from the 80s. And apparently they are still doing some actually pretty important work. They're hard at work on a coding framework for encryption. And the plan is to showcase this at DEF CON, which is coming up next week. Joining me to talk a little bit about this in advance of the Hacker Conference is Joseph Menn. Joseph actually wrote the book on the CDC entitled Cult of the Dead Cow, How the Original Hacking Supergroup Might Just Save the World. Recently, though, wrote about this new technology for the Washington Post. So it's good to have you back, Joseph. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. So before we get to Valid, which is what the technology is called, before we get to that, kind of catch us up a little bit to date on what the CDC, and by the way, I do mean Cult of the Dead Cow for anyone listening, not Centers for the Disease Control, but what they've been up to in recent years, let alone decades. But recently, has there been much that we've been seeing from this group aside from this news that we're about to talk about?
Individual members have done more than the group as a whole. The group as a whole, gets together and talks about things and plots privately, and they sort of help each other on each other's personal projects. But they haven't had like a big show release for years. So this is kind of a return to the glory days, I'd say the late 90s and early 00s is when they were like the biggest deals. But they've had a resurgence. actually, honestly, in part due to the book, but there's been a sort of a broader embrace of hacktivism generally in the last few years, and they're kind of the OGs in that regard. So people have turned to them, and then some of the individuals have been making big news. Most notably, Mudge Zatko testifying before Congress last year that the security at Twitter, where he had been head of security, was so bad that it put the company in violation of multiple Federal Trade Commission agreements. And the FTC opened a pretty massive investigation that's now ongoing.
Okay, so they've kept pretty busy individually, and now together, this technology that they're working on, it's an encryption technology called Valid. I think I'm pronouncing that right. This is the code that the CDC is working on. Who exactly is Valid for? What exactly is it intended to do? And I guess, how does it differ from what we already have out there?
So it's really interesting. It is pronounced Valid. You got that right. We'll know more on a week from Friday at the first day of DEF CON, when they're opening the conference with an introduction to Valid and the technical parts of it. But the idea is that it will be a basis for other people to make apps. The group intends to make its own apps, including a messaging app, and a social networking app. But all of them will have this framework. They're providing like the building blocks for this. And it sort of combines elements of BitTorrent. It's a distributed network such that everybody who joins makes the network faster and more effective. And all the apps will interact over that. It'll be end-to-end encrypted. And the idea is that it will work for anything, messaging, or sharing files, or even social networking. And in none of the cases will they be harvesting data on the individual. So for the messaging app it will be like Signal, only you don't have to give up your phone number, which makes it actually more secure than Signal if they get it right. So it's the building blocks, or it's like one of them described it as a house that's not furnished yet. And then they have to convince the developers to come in and put in some nice furniture, individual apps that will run on the Valid framework.
Interesting. Okay, so then it occurs to me that without this data collection, I mean, at the end of the day, CDC hopefully is hoping that developers will be intrigued by this code base, by what they're doing around encryption, intrigued by this idea of a lack of data collection. I mean, that is kind of at the core of what this is going to be about. How do they entice developers, people building products, to do this? And granted, I fully realize there's only so much we actually know about this, but I mean, from the broad perspective of the fact that like data collection is how so many of these kinds of apps make money nowadays. If you're not making money on that, like what other directions do people turn if they want to use this?
So there are other ways to make money. You can charge for your app. You can have like freemium services. You could even advertise if you wanted to. It just can't be the sort of micro-targeted advertising, data vacuuming norm that we all love when Facebook and Google and Twitter do to us. You're right that it's less obvious a pitch. But, there's been a lot of resentment of particularly the biggest tech companies, but also the shadowy data brokers and the the instantaneous ad transactions where everybody is bidding on the right to, sell to a given person in their 30s in a given neighborhood who drives a given car. I mean, it's gotten out of control. And I think you asked me earlier who this is for, and the end user is intended to be regular folks. Tor is not used by regular folks. They want the apps that are built on Valid to be used by ordinary folks and people that will be happy not to be targeted by ads and to have their conversations private. So that includes, populations that are more at risk or heavily surveilled, and also just regular people. And I think one thing that's going for it is that people are so fed up with Twitter, most lately, that they're willing to experiment. I mean, there are all these, attempts at Twitter replacements or partial replacements that are having, surprising numbers of people try it out, right away. So I think there is clearly an appetite for something other than the giants we all know and love /hate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then is that the biggest challenge that you think they face in getting people to use this, the monetary aspect, or are there other potential kind of technological aspects of this that might be a hard pill based on what we know, of course?
I think we'll know more after DEF CON. People need to be, so far the testing of it is small. They're going to expand that, so lots of people will be kicking the tires. I mean, one of the things that it is a framework, so people will have to do some coding on top of it, but the people who are not in the group, who have played with it, who've tested it, who've kicked the tires, say it's really good, and it should be pretty robust. One of the things it has going for it is that it's majority written by Chris Rue, who is actually a genius. He and Mudge were the two great technical minds of the heyday of cDC. He founded a multi-billion-dollar company called Veracode, which, it was a real innovator in binary analysis of code. So you didn't have to, rely on what vendors of code were telling you the code was going to do. You could, even if you didn't, you could find out yourself what it was doing. And sometimes that was different. So really innovative guy. And he's been putting, 3 years into this. He doesn't have to work at all. He's, filthy rich, and he hates what the internet has decayed into. I mean, a lot of people use, I don't know if I can say this on air, that term N blankification. It's true. I mean, people coming online don't know that the web was better before, which is crazy. Tech is supposed to get better all the time, but the actual user experience is getting worse and worse. I mean, Google's front page sucks. I mean, how can you screw that up?
Yeah. Yeah, we've been saying on the network enshirtification, just to, but remember PR, and you'll know exactly what you're talking about. When it comes to the more kind of encrypted, protected protocols like this, what about content moderation? Because this is something that, becomes a much more difficult task when you're talking about encrypted, technologies like this. Have they shed any sort of light ahead of the event next week on how they plan to tackle that?
I think that's one of the most interesting issues and one of the hardest. It's hard for everybody. Anybody who does anything on the internet has to think about moderation, in part for legal reasons, and in part, because it'll deteriorate and get horrible if there's nothing. So they've had to think about this really hard. And the people who've been involved in the policy discussions about this, said that in some ways it's terrifying, in some ways it's liberating, because they mentioned federation. Lots of people are doing federation. Mastodon is part of the Fediverse. And the appeal of that is you can have your own community with its own rules. And if you don't like it, you can go to another server. But it also means that it's kind of a mess, and you can't count on stuff lasting. And the big companies can sort of push off responsibility to a given node. You can't get away with that in something that's completely distributed like Veiled. So one of the decisions that they've made is that in the first iteration of their own social networking app, and they encourage other people to do different social networking apps, it'll be by invite only. So I'm going to pick the people I want in my social network, and therefore I'm not going to have mad stalkers show up and call me racial slurs. And that's one of the decisions that have been made. I think there are a lot of others, and there's some still in the works, and they're inviting other people to join in the discussion and thrash this out. But it's a tough issue, but they're providing the tools, and you can build something crappy with it or something terrific with it, or at least try. So it'll be up to the individual app developers to make most of these calls.
Okay, well, Joseph, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to us about this. And of course, I imagine, we're all going to know a lot more next week, including Bronson in the other room. He's really curious to hear all about Veiled. So that's happening next week at DEF CON. You can read Joseph's piece at the Washington Post. And Joseph, it's great to talk with you again. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Good to see you in Bronson.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All righty, folks. Up next, I'm super pumped to be talking about the below/sub/undersea cables that are kind of the backbone of the internet. We'll get there in just a moment, but I do want to take a quick break to tell you about our first sponsor of today's episode of Tech News Weekly. It's the AWS Insiders podcast. AWS Insiders is a fast-paced, entertaining, and insightful look behind the scenes of AWS and cloud computing. And look, this isn't your typical talking heads tech podcast. So imagine you listen to many of those in each week. So add one that's a little bit different because you got high production value, high energy, and high entertainment. It's full of captivating stories from the early days of AWS to today and beyond. Hosts Rahul Subramaniam and Hillary Doyle dig into the current state and the future of AWS by talking with the people and the companies that know it best. Rahul is a veteran AWS pro. He's got more than 15 years of experience managing more than 45,000 AWS instances. He's known for pushing AWS products to their limits and for believing AWS is truly the operating system of the future. AWS Insiders is a show that's full of opinions, of takeaways, and also untold stories about the challenges, innovations, and the mind-blowing promise of cloud computing. There was a recent episode, it's actually the latest episode that's out, called When Netflix Bet on AWS. And I found this one really interesting because it talks about how kind of Netflix and AWS worked together to make each other better. And so what they did was they brought on Adrian Cockcroft, the former Netflix cloud architect, to talk about it, and is now the AWS VP of Sustainability Architecture. So somebody with a lot of chops talking about the sort of history of Netflix and how they used AWS to get things up and running. There's also an episode in season 2. It's episode 3. It's called Moderna, mRNA, and AWS. And I think this is a particularly interesting episode. Rahul, Hillary, and Moderna's Director of Data Engineering and Cloud Architecture discuss how Moderna depends on AWS in the cloud and how Moderna was kind of a cloud first company and the impact that had on their medical research. So if that sounds interesting to you, and how could it not, you should search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player or visit cloudfix.aurea.com/podcast. That's cloudfix.aurea.com/podcast. And of course, we'll also include a link in the show notes. Our thanks to AWS Insiders for their support. And we are back from the break. So let me get things kicked off here. I was scrolling through the internet. Yes. A little bit ago now. And I was over on CNET and I came across this headline. And immediately was taken in. It's called, the headline was "The Secret Life of the 500 Plus Cables That Run the Internet." And I thought, I need to know more about that. And boy, howdy, did I learn a lot. Joining us today to talk about it is the author of the piece, Stephen Shankland from CNET. Stephen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me on again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to get to chat with you. And I'm, again, so happy that you and the team put this together. Before we do get into the story itself, I do want to know what led to the production of this piece. Like, what made you want to look into subsea cables? How did this come about?
Okay, I've been writing about internet infrastructure for decades, right? So I've always had sort of a high interest in this general technology area, but subsea cables in particular intrigued me. I've been actually wanting to write this story for about 5 years. I would hear of some new cable arriving or some other cable getting cut and it being disaster. The Tonga volcanic eruption a few months ago piqued my interest again. I finally had a chance to clear my schedule out, talk to a whole lot of people, and put this piece together. So I've been wanting to write it for a while, but the thing that actually got me to write it was Tonga, and then also curiously, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then all the saber rattling with China and Taiwan, because internet infrastructure is really important, and now it's militarily vulnerable. So that's what got me to write it right now.
Yeah, kind of thinking about that aspect of it, the geopolitical, geotechnopolitical aspect of it is something else. Now, there's a lot to cover here. And importantly, folks, I am not going to let Stephen tell you everything about the piece because you need to go over to CNET and read it. But I do want to cover some of the highlights. Let's start by talking about the cables themselves. Because when I was thinking about these cables, I'm thinking these are, massive Mario Bros pipes that are running underneath the ocean from place to place. So let's tell the listeners what they look like, how long they can end up being, and what exactly it is that they do.
They are skinny. They're about the width of a garden hose, maybe about as big as my thumb around. I had a sample, I don't have it right here, but they're about that big across for the part that's stretched across much of the bottom of the ocean. Now, at either end of the cable, where they go across, closer to shore, they get beefed up, armored. They have thicker metal, steel housing, the armor around it that protects them against things like just people banging into them, ship anchors, a lot of other wear and tear. So they do get thicker toward the shore, but mostly they're actually really pretty skinny. They get very long, 20,000 kilometers, I think are the longest ones, 12,000 miles or so. That's huge to go across the Pacific Ocean. Many of them, of course, are much shorter. And right now there are about 870,000 miles of these laid across the surface, across the bottom of the ocean floors around the world. About 550 of them right now, either in operation or planned in the next couple of years.
My goodness. And what's inside of one of these cables? Like, what are the materials, at least, that are inside?
Well, of course, they're made up of several layers. Now, the most important one is at the very center. They're super thin fiber optic strands. So these are the same fiber optics that carry, information all around the world. But strangely, really came as a big surprise to me. There are very few of these fiber optic strands. Usually only 8 or 16. Most of the cables right now max out at 16, but various efforts are underway to increase that number. And the reason that there are so few of them is not because of problems with the cables themselves, but because every 50 or 100 miles or so, you have to boost the signal. And so inside these cables, every few, 50 or 100 miles, there's something called a repeater. It's a big sort of a thick section in the cable that boosts the light signals going through those fiber optic lines. And those repeaters need power. So that is what limits the length of the cable. And so outside the fiber optics, there's actually a little tube of copper, and that's what carries power to the repeaters. So the repeaters are kind of the limiting aspect of the technology right now, because you need those repeaters to boost the power, and you can't, to boost the data without those, and so you can't fit more and more, you can't fit enough strands in there without more repeaters. So it's power limited right now.
Right. Yeah. And I remember you talking about kind of the heat aspect of it, and it's sort of it's a really huge balancing act, right? Trying to figure out exactly what you need to do in terms of repeaters and power. And I mean, the kind of incredible amount of power where you mentioned that they can essentially, if they wanted to, they could provide power from one side of the cable and reach out to get all of the repeaters. Often, though, there is power on both sides just for redundancy's sake. That alone was kind of mind-boggling to me. Now, with all of that in mind, you've got thousands of kilometers, right? How much do these cables cost, and who the heck is paying for them? Is this something that Xfinity Comcast is covering, or is it funded by the government? Like, who out there is paying for these things?
Well, a few decades ago, it would be telecommunications companies, and the information you'd put over the cables would be phone calls. And now, of course, it's internet data that you're putting across these cables. And with that change has come a change in ownership. So it used to be the phone companies, national or private, would fund these cables, the construction of them and the operation of them. But now increasingly, it's actually the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon. These are the folks who have the huge data appetite to fund these cables. They cost a lot of money. So a new modern transatlantic cable, about $250 million to $300 million to design and install. They're not simple. They're complicated and expensive. You have to do site surveys. You have to buy a lot of equipment. You have to pay ships to lay the cables. So they're very expensive. But for these companies that have a lot of data centers and have to move data from place to place to transfer your emails, your YouTube videos, your social network posts, your business data that a lot of these companies house, they are the ones who have a powerful financial need to have enough capacity in place to handle all this traffic. So something like 99% of the traffic that's going across continents or to island nations goes across these subsea cables. You might think satellites are important. Satellites are important, but they're not nearly as important as these subsea cables when it comes to international communications and commerce.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was hoping you could also talk about the process of installing these cables. I was shocked to hear that in deeper parts of the ocean, as you mentioned, they're just kind of hanging out on the seafloor, just ready for anything to happen to them. But what does the process involve? Are we having like divers going down and with little trowels and digging them out and putting little sandcastles on top of them? What's the process for that?
No, actually, divers are occasionally involved, especially over at the shore ends of things, but mostly this is done by ships. So at the shore ends, the cables are buried fairly deeply. You don't notice them, but they go across beaches in some places. You can just walk right across one. You don't even know it in some parts of the world. So the way they're installed is there's going to be some nondescript building on the shore that'll have a bunch of network equipment in it and a whole lot of power supplied to it. And then the cable will go underground underneath a beach somewhere and then out, across the sea. So the first step that these companies have to figure out when they're building these cables is where to put them. So obviously the data demands, between one city and another is the first question. Then they have to pick a route that avoids, marine sanctuaries, places where there's lots of fishing or other activity, and geological problems like earthquakes, mudslides, and volcanoes, things like that, those sort of natural hazards. So it's difficult to plan the route. Once they plan the route, they put the end stations in, and then they get a very large ship that has huge tanks with the cables coiled inside, and they just drape it as they travel this route. They drape it very carefully. Now, one of the interesting things is toward the shore ends, in particular, of the cable route, they have a special plow that gets dragged behind the ship that actually buries the cable underneath the seafloor. So it's a pretty laborious process. A ship can carry several thousand miles of cable, but they still often have to make multiple trips out from the shore to where they're laying the cable. Obviously, that takes a long time, and sometimes they can't do it all just from one end to another. They'll have to lay one stretch and then another stretch. Sometimes they'll have to do it in backwards order, which means they have to laboriously re-spool all the cables so they can put the correct end down at the bottom. So it's a very complicated process.
Wow. Can you imagine getting through a process and then realizing, oh no, we put it the wrong way? That sounds mortifying. Now, something that, and by the way, folks, there is so much that Stephen has put together in that part about installing the cables that you have got to go read the piece to learn more about it, where they talk about flipping the spools and doing all this other stuff. So that is something to be saved for you to go check out. But another highlight that really stuck out to me, like any given time, there are about 10 of these cables that are just cut. Like, what? Tell us about cable cuts, how that happens, and what do they do about it? I mean, will the internet just suddenly go out everywhere if enough of these cable cuts happen? What do they do? Are there backups?
There are backups. So first of all, on the capacity, on the cables themselves, they deliberately size the capacity larger than they need because they know that there are going to be outages somewhere at some point. So they actually plan very deliberately for outages. So yeah, every 2 or 3 days, another cable somewhere in the world gets cut. And you might ask, well, why? Why do they get cut? Mostly it's because of anchors of ships dragging across them, or because of fishing equipment getting tangled up. And most of those problems happen closer toward the shore, which is good because it's easier to repair the cables that are closer to the shore. Across the bottom of the Pacific, the cables are very deep. They're not dragging fishing equipment across the bottom so much. So that's actually where fewer the cuts happen. It tends to be, in higher traffic areas. But yeah, they do happen. It's a problem. And there are lots of things that the companies do to protect against this situation. So as I said, the first one is they size the cable capacity higher so that if one cable from New York to London breaks, well, they have another cable from Boston to Ireland that has some extra capacity. So they turn that on for a while they get the original cable fixed. Another thing they do is they actually swap capacity. So say Meta might borrow a little capacity from Google cable. They might actually swap ownership of a few fiber pairs from each other's cables so that if one company's cable goes down, they have more capacity elsewhere. But of course, then there are the repairs. So when a cable is cut, they know where it's cut. They can tell where it's cut. They send a ship out to actually splice in a new piece. So they reach down with a grappler, which is, centuries old technology. They grab the cable because they know pretty well where the cables are laid on the bottom of the ocean. They pick it up and they will graft on a new, new fiber optics onto one end, float that cable, pick up the other end, graft on fiber optics to the other end, and then attach that strand to both sides. So they can repair it. It's a routine part of the operation. You pay you pay a contractor to be on call with ships to repair the cables when needed.
Wow. Okay. Well, lastly, I want to ask you, you mentioned earlier, and I do think it's true, we are often kind of looking up and thinking about that there's a lot more coverage, I think, and conversation about the satellites that are providing connectivity around the world. But what we know to be true, and especially after reading this, is that really it's the subsea cables that are providing most of what we have. So I'm kind of curious, based on the conversations that you've had, is there a slowing in the installation of new subsea cables as tech companies look to the skies? Or is this just such a great way of doing it that we will continue to see more undersea or subsea cables installed? And when it comes to that, is it a matter of somehow upgrading the cables that are already there, or is it just we keep adding more cables?
So mostly we're adding more cables. So satellites are great, but I tend to think of satellites as chiefly useful for kind of retail connection, broadband to homes that are in rural areas, or some military operation in some place. So those guys like Starlink or Hughes or Viasat satellites that are way up there. But that doesn't really provide anything like the amount of data capacity that the hyperscalers, the big tech companies need. So that's why there's actually a subsea cable building boom going on right now, kind of a surge. There are $10 billion being invested this year through 2025 in new subsea cables, because these guys, their data demands are going up at something like 50-60% per year. Huge growth. So yeah, they're building out new cables, and the satellites, there's just no way they can keep up. Now the satellites are getting more important, and I think that's going to be a bigger part of our internet interaction is going to be coming over satellites, especially if you're somewhere away from the cell networks. But if you need to send these cables send, the fastest one just went online 400 terabits per second. That's something like 400,000 times faster than fast gigabit broadband. So this is, these subsea cables provide vastly more capacity, and that's really essential to, the functioning of the global economy.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Stephen Shankland, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day today to talk about this. Of course, everyone should head over to CNET to check out this piece. You can find the link in the show notes. But if folks want to follow you online and stay up to date with your work, where should they go to do so?
Sure. Well, I publish at cnet.com. You can find me on Twitter, now known as X, at ST Shank, which has a link to all my other social profiles, since who knows what's going to happen with X/Twitter over the next year or five. So that's the easiest way to follow me.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We appreciate it. And we'll look forward to having you back on again soon.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. One of my favorites. I love reading his pieces, and especially this is fascinating stuff. So it's nice to know more information about these things that like literally are like hidden and obscured under the sea. There's a lot we haven't known until now. So it's really fascinating. Coming up next, though, the IRS, our favorite topic in the world, finally stepping, well, I'd say further into the digital age. So we got some news there. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Collide. Collide is a device trust solution for companies with Okta. They ensure that if a device isn't trusted and isn't secure, it's not going to be able to log into your cloud apps. That's it. If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, then this message is especially for you. Have you noticed in the past few years, the majority of data breaches and hacks that you read about, they all have something in common, and it's not the systems as much as it is the employees. Sometimes an employee's device gets hacked because of unpatched software. Sometimes an employee leaves sensitive data in an unsecured place, and then it seems like every day a hacker breaks into these systems using credentials that they phished from an employee, right? That's the weakness there, the employee. The problem here is not your end users, it's the solutions that are supposed to prevent these breaches, but it doesn't actually have to be that way. Imagine a world where only secure devices can actually access your cloud apps, only once they're known to be secure. In this world, phished credentials are useless to hackers, and you can manage every OS, that includes Linux, all from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues. They can fix it themselves without creating more work for your IT team. And the really good news here, of course, is that you don't have to imagine this world at all. You can just start using Collide and you'll get everything that I just spoke about. So visit collide.com/TNW. You can book an on-demand demo today and see how it works for yourself. And I'll spell it out for you. KOLIDE.com/TNW. That's collide.com/TNW. We want to thank them for their support of Tech News Weekly. I'm looking around because Bronson's in here, but you know what? He's chomping on a bull stick. So I think I'm good to go. I probably have it easy another 10 minutes in me before he starts getting impatient. And if my video goes away, he found the power plug and he's biting it. Prevent it from happening. Let's talk a little bit about the U.S. tax system. The IRS U.S. tax paperwork process about to get a whole lot more high tech, which is to say that there is a digital kind of aspect to filing our taxes already, but not everybody is using it. And the system actually has a lot of ways that it can be improved, catch up with the times, in other words. President Biden actually passed the Inflation Reduction Act last year. And then, and that was actually passed for, I believe, $80 billion to go into improving the agency's technology systems over the next 10 years. There was a reduction this year of around 20 billion. So that leaves about 60 billion in total for the coming years to put into this. I think it's over the next, I said the next 10 years. It's the largest influx of funding for the IRS. And this week, the reason that it's news is this week, the Treasury Department announced a bunch of improvements to the tax paperwork process. And it all involves just making it more digital, more, reducing the need for all of that paperwork, which if you've done your taxes, I'm sure you have. My goodness, is there a lot of paperwork? So anything that can make it a lot easier. It's dubbed the Paperless Processing Initiative. And there are a number of changes there. Including the ability to digitally submit all paperwork for the 2024 tax season that files in 2025. That includes non-tax forms. It includes electronic communication methods, so you can keep your communication all electronic. And in a completely paperless filing season, in other words, you could still have everything electronic, and doing so would actually cut the processing times in half, according to the IRS. So they're looking to cut down because they actually have had a backlog, which I'll talk about in a second. But this is the first part. I said it's a 10-year process. It's going to cost that $60 billion over the course of that 10 years to totally modernize and transform the system. That's their approach. And it will impact how they enforce, kind of the processes behind the scenes on how they enforce around their taxes, and the efficacy of that. But I said that they're kind of backlogged. And as with everything in this world right now, COVID wreaked havoc on this system in particular. It resulted in a backlog of 22.5 million unprocessed paper returns. And when you think about the scope of that, 22.5 million paper returns that all require manual processing, that just sounds like a nightmare to me. I suppose it's the way that it's been done for a very long time, as they've kind of stepped further and further into this digitization, this digital realm that they're trying to move even further into. But my goodness, having that much of a backlog. So this would actually convert to digital form all of that. It's being received by the IRS going forward. So the idea would be that starting in 2025, any paper filings that do come in, which, you know, they're never going to totally and completely get rid of the ability to file on paper, because maybe not everybody has the ability to file digitally. But as they come in, instead of those kind of piling up and creating a further backlog, the idea is that the system will be nailed down in a way that in 2025, as those things come in, it's part of the process to digitize them on the way in. And so it converts everything to digital eventually. So paper, filings don't stay in the non-digital realm. They get converted, makes it easier and more appealing to do it digitally from the onset as well. Just kind of makes things faster, or so they hope. Mm-hmm. But like I said, filing paper will always be offered for those who can't submit that digitally. The IRS is pledging to digitally process all paper submissions and the correspondence as well. So that hopefully brings everybody, whether they're filing by paper or filing digitally, into that digital realm. And it actually has a cost savings. They would also be digitizing up to 1 billion of these historical documents that they've had stored, to give access to that data to taxpayers. That would have an even bigger tax or a bigger savings for the IRS in storage costs, around which they pay around $40 million annually just to store all that historical documentation. So that would be moving it.
Oh, because they're doing it physically and real estate is expensive. Got it.
Yes, absolutely. They have to have the space, right, to store this and to reference it and all that kind of stuff. So digitization of all this stuff just improves the efficiency and the cost on everything. So I guess hopefully the moral of the story is, in the coming years, this might actually lead to faster turnarounds. I know, a lot in the last couple of years, you file your taxes, you're waiting to get your turnaround, to get your refund or whatever. Sometimes it can take a long time for that turnaround to happen. This would hopefully speed things up. So, I'm for the IRS getting more into encouraging more of that digital, the digital aspect of filing. And
especially if it means that,
and I think it's overdue is I think the point.
Yeah. And especially if it means that the companies who are spending so much money to lobby our lawmakers to keep the tax code so complicated so that you buy their software. I'm talking about Tax Slayer and TurboTax and H&R Block and all of those companies. If it means that more people are able to just file their taxes directly with the IRS and not have to worry about it, then it's good. But this is kind of wild to me because I don't know that I know anyone who has any level of affinity for the IRS. No, that has any level of affinity for the IRS. And so one would think it's kind of difficult to pass through legislation that gives so much money to an organization that is so fundamentally disliked. And so it's kind of wild. They were able, in the beginning, what was it? It was like 80 billion, and then maybe it was 80 and then they got cut
it was
back.
80 billion, got cut back to 60. So
yeah. So I'm not surprised that, I am surprised. Sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time. I am surprised that they were able to push that through, because ultimately it does lead to a better thing for everybody. But it's one of those things where you're going, yeah, but do we really want to give this organization money that whenever we don't like this organization in the first place?
Yeah, it's kind of like when you buy a house and the work that needs to be done is work that isn't seen. It's not cosmetic. It's like,
right.
Underneath it, it's like, well, it's necessary and it's expensive, but it's no fun.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't feel like you get any immediate, gain out of it. I suppose in this case, though, if it really does speed things up, if the further movement into the digital realm for IRS and taxes and all that does make the process suck a little less, and move a little bit faster and stuff. I guess for something that people don't necessarily enjoy, that's at least a little bit of a positive out of it.
And the headline of this was the reason why they said they were giving the IRS so much money was to go after high income folks who aren't paying their taxes. Like that was the reason why we're giving them so much money is we're trying to hire more people to do more analysis to make sure that everybody's paying their fair share. Instead of what, I guess its current state where it's kind of nickel and diming folks who are not high income earners and just disregarding the high income earners. So if it's also actually truly being used for that to make sure that high income earners are paying their fair share, great. I'd love to see that. Do I believe that that's what's going to happen? No. Do I think that it will just result in people who are struggling to make a living doing jobs like, hair cutting and things like that, where they use the quick payment platforms to be able to receive money for the work that they're doing, and those forms are going to end up having to be reported to the IRS, which is going to result in those folks being taxed even more money. Yeah, that's what I think is going to end up happening, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm not bullish about this at all, as you can tell. But yeah, at least the IRS is getting to save more money by not having buildings where they're storing our files.
And scene. There we go.
All right, folks, let's take a quick a non-salty break, so I can tell you about our next sponsor who doesn't make me salty. It is Bitwarden, who are bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. It's the only open source cross-platform password manager anywhere, anytime. Security Now's Steve Gibson, he's switched over to Bitwarden. With Bitwarden, all of the data in your vault is end-to-end encrypted, not just your passwords. And think about this. In the summer 2023 G2 Enterprise Grid Report, they solidified their position as the highest performing password manager for the enterprise, leaving the competitors in the dust. Bitwarden protects your data and privacy by adding strong, randomly generated passwords for each account. And then you can go even further with the username generator that helps you create unique usernames for each account and any of the 5 integrated email alias services, so you can have a unique email for every single account. And what makes Bitwarden so awesome is that it is open source, so you can view all of Bitwarden's code on GitHub. On top of being public to the world, Bitwarden also has professional third-party audits that are performed yearly, and the results get published on their website. Bitwarden is open source security that you can trust. With Bitwarden, you can share private data securely with coworkers, across departments, or the entire company with fully customizable and adaptable plans. Bitwarden's Teams organization option is $3 per month per user, while their enterprise organization plan is just $5 per month per user. Individuals always get Bitwarden's basic free account for unlimited passwords. You can upgrade anytime to a premium account for less than $1 a month, or bring the whole family with their family organization option to give up to 6 users premium features for only $3.33 a month. Yes, it is time to make sure your family family is using better passwords. Get them on that family plan. Bitwarden has launched its new Bitwarden Secrets Manager, which is soon coming out of beta. Secrets Manager keeps those sensitive developer secrets out of source code and eliminates the risk of public exposition. And right now, our friends at Bitwarden want to hear why you love your password manager. They are offering cash prizes in a short video contest. Visit bitwarden.com/talent to learn how to enter and win. Find examples, rules, and submission instructions. Enter by August 13th, 2023. At Twit, of course, we are fans of password managers. Everybody should have a password manager. That's what I'm always saying. So get started with Bitwarden's free trial of a Teams or Enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. That's bitwarden.com/twit. And of course, we thank Bitwarden for their support of this episode of Tech News Weekly. All right, back from the break, and I've got a quick story. We think about the generative AI being in the news a lot lately as this sort of chatbot system, the personalized AI, the AI that is going to help you tell stories or write email or do all of these, different things. But what I think sometimes is glossed over or is forgotten is that AI can be very good at taking vast amounts of data and finding little trends in that data, or taking vast amounts of photos and being able to be trained to understand certain aspects of the photo. So something as simple as feeding an AI a photo and then having it tell you if there is a hot dog in the photo. That is a silly use of it, but it can be taken to the next level where you feed it in images of skin, and then you show skin that has melanoma, and then it starts to understand the difference between a mole or a melanoma, and then you suddenly have a system on your phone that can help determine if you should go to see a doctor about the latest pigmented area to show up on your skin. Well, another place where this is popping up or cropping up is with NASA. IBM and NASA have teamed up to create a means of studying and understanding climate, to look at, to track deforestation, to predict crop yields, and to track greenhouse gas emissions. Which all are, of course, incredibly important, and all are, of course, incredibly difficult and unwieldy to be able to track or predict in the case of crop yields. There was a study done in, I can't remember what year it was. It's been several years ago now, but actually, let me look it up. There's a study done, by researchers in the, here we go. Sorry, I know this is, okay. So in Nature in 2015, in September of 2015, researchers did a study trying to figure out tree density on the Earth. And they estimated that the number of trees on Earth is 3.04 trillion trees. 3.04 trillion trees on the Earth, which means that there are more, and this is going to, I think, blow some people's minds. It blew mine, and I even after reading it and understanding it, I still didn't believe it. There are more trees on Earth than there are stars in our galaxy. More trees on this single planet than there are stars in our galaxy. We understand the number of stars in our galaxy to be around 400 billion at the most. And again, there are 3.04 trillion trees on Earth. So if you can imagine that, tracking deforestation is not an easy thing when you have so many doggone trees on a planet. And by taking this data and working with IBM, which released its WatsonX.ai, I imagine they pronounce it WatsonX AI, they were able to kind of train those sets of data and help to label flood areas, burn scar areas, and use that for its predictive model. What's cool is that Hugging Face, which is kind of the open source system for showing different AI models and systems, I guess. It's a platform rather that shows AI models and systems and stores them. Hugging Face has this model, and so you can actually check it out and make use of it if you want to. But yeah, this is all being made available, and is something where we're hearing about two companies that kind of aren't at the forefront of the latest coverage, right? Because we've seen OpenAI get a lot of coverage, and some of the other companies, Meta, of course, and Microsoft, which is kind of OpenAI in the background. But to hear about IBM going, hey, don't forget about us, we're still here, and then working with NASA to build what is kind of like NASA GPT is pretty cool.
I love that. I love these kinds of applications for AI because you're right. It is easy to always fall into the generative AI trap. Like, oh, check it out. It can make something that, that sounds like something else or looks like something else. Or we can, like train Bronson, don't do that. Or we can I'll just bring him up here. He can be part of the show. Or we can just train an AI to recognize things that are very, very complicated for the human eye to recognize in things that are incredibly important on like a world scale. There was a news story just this week about how AI trained in medical uses, was able to detect like on mammograms the existence of breast cancer, at least according to one report. 20% higher likelihood of detecting these things. Those seem like ways where AI, like that just seems like the perfect fit for these things. You do come, through the other side though and go, okay, but we know about, some people call the hallucinations aspect, and you gotta still be darn sure that what you're getting is 100% accurate, and that requires human fact checking. But I love this. I think this is fantastic, a fantastic use of this technology. Love it.
Yeah, I agree. I want to see more of this. We're seeing AI being used in medical research to look at the folds of proteins and perhaps suggest new types of proteins that can be used in medicines. And from the democratization of some of the more simple aspects. One time, not too long ago, so it's kind of an involved story, but essentially, due to my metabolism not properly making use of carbohydrates, I had read and learned about how you can kind of temporarily go onto a ketogenic diet. And in doing so, it sort of resets your metabolism and makes it so that whenever you're back to a more standard American diet, that those carbohydrates will be processed better. So I went on the ketogenic diet. And for some reason, it's very rare for people not of Indian descent, and I mean from India, to have this happen. I got what was called keto rash. And it has to do with your body's reaction to ketones, which of course is what is at the heart of the ketogenic diet. And it basically produces this 3-stage rash on you that has a period of horrible itching. I mean, it's a nightmare, and it's all over your neck and everything. So I reached out to my doctor about it, went in and, sent photos and whatnot. And my doctor misinterpreted, I guess, what I was saying and what she saw, and thought that I had what's the thing where you had chickenpox early in life and then it stays in your nervous system for a while and then you get older and it's
what is that?
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right?
It's on the tip of my tongue, yes, but I can't remember.
I wish I could remember. My great grandma had shingles. Thank you, chat room.
I had shingles. Yes, I should have known that right away. Yes. It's not fun.
Yeah, so shingles almost always only presents on one side of your body. It's either on the left side or the right side. It's typically not mirrored. And she didn't realize that mine was mirrored or that it was appearing on both sides. And so she thought I had shingles. And so she started to, treat for that. Well, I was pretty sure I didn't have shingles because I knew about the left side versus the right side. So I started to do my own research, and I ended up having to dig into medical like research papers and found this thing that is, the name escapes me, but essentially it is keto rash. And it's the only way to treat it was through an antibiotic, which is kind of weird because typically an antibiotic is not something that you would use for an allergic reaction, right? She'd given me steroids for it. But I had to not only figure that out, say, hey, look, it's not appearing on both sides of my body, it's appearing on one, but then also link to these different peer-reviewed journals that had these articles about keto rash and everything else, and send that information off to her. She was still not certain. And of course, doctors, they don't like to give antibiotics because it's, people take them when they shouldn't, and then it leads to superbugs. So totally understand. But she sent it off to the dermatologist, who was immediately like, yeah, he absolutely has keto rash. Give him the antibiotics. She did. And within a week, it was cleared up. That me just talking about it right there took forever to do. You can only imagine how much longer it took from the start to the end, and all of the work that I had to do to sort of advocate for myself to make that happen. And so all of that's to say, it would have been cool if I could have taken some photos with, my phone or whatever, and then upload it. And it could even be a system that they use on their side, but they have the massive amounts of data, including access to those journals where they're seeing that exact kind of pattern appearing on the body. Plus, I'm talking about my symptoms. That AI can put all of those together and go, oh, this guy has prurigo pigmentosa. Thank you, Scooter X. And then I would have been able to be, helped with that earlier on. So yeah, any of these kinds of uses of AI where they're taking these gigantic sums and masses of data and looking for patterns across all of them, I will continue to celebrate this and cheer this on, and hope that we see more and more of this.
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to be more and more kind of some of the biggest breakthroughs will be in exactly what you're talking about, where we go, okay, this is legit. If you haven't already felt like it was legit, now it is, because check out what it's doing in the medical field or the environment, being able to scan for certain things that just for humans is a lot more complicated. It takes a lot more time, and that can be incredibly useful. So. That's interesting. That's that. Well, we've reached the end, all three of us. I don't know what Bronson's chewing on right now, but he's chewing on something. I can hear it. Tech News Weekly publishes every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. That's where you can go to subscribe to the show in audio and video formats. Just subscribe. You'll get the download automatically. That's kind of why we do it that way. It makes it easier for you. So twit.tv/TNW.
If you would like to get all of our shows ad-free, by the way, you should check out Club Twit, because for $7 a month or $84 a year, you out there can join the club. When you do, you get every single show with no ads. It's all of the content, none of the ads. You get access to the Twit Plus bonus feed that has extra content you won't find anywhere else, behind the scenes, before the show, after the show, as well as special Club Twit events that get published there. And you get access to the Club Twit Discord, a fun place to go to chat with your fellow Club Twit members and also those of us here at Twit. It is always busy and fun and popping in the club, as I like to say. Lots of different conversations and different topics of conversation. So anything you want to nerd out or geek out about, you can right there in the club. Again, starts at $7 a month, not because it's a tiered system, but because some folks said, hey, we'd like to give you some more money. So you can choose to pay more than $7 a month if you'd like. But hey, even that $7 a month is incredibly helpful. And we appreciate every single one of you who not only join the club, but tell others about the club. twit.tv/clubtwit. And folks, we continue to add great shows that are Club Twit exclusives. So you really do want to hop on and join the club. You can check out the Untitled Linux show, which is, as you might imagine, a show all about Linux. There's also Hands on Windows, which is a short format show from Paul Thurrott that covers Windows tips and tricks. There's Hands on Mac, which is my short format show that covers Apple tips and tricks. I have my part 2 episode coming out today for the new features in macOS Sonoma. Shout out to Sonoma. That is launching soon, probably in October. By that, I mean the software. The video is coming out today. And also Home Theater Geeks from Scott Wilkinson has relaunched in the club. So you can check that out there too. And there will soon be a show from Jason Howell covering artificial intelligence. We were just talking about that. So you really got to join the club, got to check it out. And in the meantime, of course, you can also hang out with Jason in the club. Most weeks he's kind of doing a little bit of chat live and video in the club leading up to the introduction of the show. So if you want to kind of help get your ideas and thoughts in there, it's a good time to do so. I'll let Jason talk about it more if he wants to. But if you want to follow me online, I am at Mikah Sargent on many a social media network, or you can head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. Check out now Hands on Mac later today if you're a member of the club. On Sundays, you can watch Ask the Tech Guys with Leo Laporte and me, where we cover all sorts of questions that you call in or email in or video in or voicemail in to ask. And we do our best to answer them on that show. And then on Tuesdays, you can watch iOS Today with Rosemary Orchard and yours truly, where we cover all things Apple's various operating systems. Jason Howell, what about you?
At Jason Howell on Twitter, twit.social/@Jason Howell, on Mastodon. Just look for me and insert your social media of choice here, and you will find me there probably in some way, shape, or form. Yes, I am doing the AI show. Right now, we're tentatively calling it, just because we don't have an official title for it, the Untitled AI Show. I don't think that's going to be the official title, but I do know that the work has been done to pull it out into its own feed within the club. So if you're a Club Twit member, you'll be able to actually subscribe to the feed. Even though the show isn't officially launched, this will give it a home for all of these tests that I'm doing. And by the way, I've got another one happening today here in about an hour, a little more than an hour, 1:15 p.m. Pacific, today, Thursday, August 3rd. So if you're a member of the club, either check it out live with me then, or we'll share some information on how to subscribe. I don't actually have that information yet, but I will once I do. Big thanks to everybody at the studio for helping us do this show each and every week. Couldn't do it without you. Also couldn't do it without you at home or commuting or wherever you are watching and listening. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey, we should talk Linux. It's the operating system that runs the internet, a bunch of game consoles, cell phones, and maybe even the machine on your desk. But you already knew all that. What you may not know is that Twit now has a show dedicated to it, the Untitled Linux Show. Whether you're a Linux pro, a burgeoning sysadmin, or just curious what the big deal is, you should join us on the Club Twit Discord every Saturday afternoon for news, analysis, and tips to sharpen your Linux skills. And then make sure you subscribe to the Club Twit exclusive Untitled Linux Show. Wait, you're not a Club Twit member yet? Well, go to twit.tv/clubtwit and sign up. Hope to see you there.